Hi everyone, this is Heather from Maxon UK, and today I'm going to show you how you can create this effect using Cinema 4D's great MoGraph toolset. So for this animation I used the fracture object along with the plane effector and the shader effector as well. I've also used the MoGraph selection tag, which some of you may not have played around with too much, but it comes in really handy for effects like this. So let's jump straight into it. So to set this up, what I needed to do was to create a mesh that I can then put into a fracture object. So to start that off, I created a series of splines like you can see here. Now most of these splines are just preset splines from the spline menu. So this large circle around the edge represents the edge of our mesh, and in there you can see I've got smaller splines that add a little bit of detail, and I've also imported from Illustrator the Maxon M as well. So for your project it could be a logo that you use, or it could be some text from your spline menu again. So how do we turn this into a mesh? Well, first of all, I need to make all of these preset splines editable. So I'm just going to select them all in the Object Manager and then make them editable. The reason I've done that is so I can go then to the Objects menu and connect objects and delete, which will turn all of these splines into one single spline, like so. So once we've done that, we need to put this into a loft object, and this will give us the beginnings of a mesh, and I'll show you in just a second. So grab a loft and make the circle spline a child of the loft. Then if I jump into perspective view, you can kind of see what this has done. So it's gone from just a series of splines to the beginnings of a mesh. I know that we do have a few holes in there, but we can sort that out in a second. So to actually be able to edit this mesh, I need to make this loft editable. So just select it and again, make editable down the left hand side. This will give you a parent null object, and in there you've got the mesh. So I'm just going to drag that out and delete the parent object just because I don't need it. So now what do we need to do? This effect relies quite a lot on where your subdivisions are. So all of these chunks are different subdivisions in the mesh. So we need to be careful about how they're laid out. If I go to Edges mode now, you can see that Cinema 4D has added its own subdivisions, which isn't exactly ideal for what we want. So we need to work a little bit on this mesh just to get the subdivisions just right for the effect that we want to achieve. So I'll show you how to do it on a small section because I don't want to bore you. So first of all, to remove some of these excess subdivisions, just Live Selection tool, and just select a few of the lines. Then if I right click anywhere in the free space, it will bring up your context menu. And down near the bottom you should see a tool called Melt. If I left click on that, you can see it just melts those lines or subdivisions away. So you can keep going. The shortcut is U and then Z, so you can get through it a little bit quicker. Like that, and you can just keep going with it. Now to add in the subdivisions that you would like, I'll just zoom in on this section a little bit. So for that we can use a knife. So again, right click in the free space and go to knife tool. I just need to deselect those lines. There you go. So now we can add in our own subdivisions, so we can create our own chunks. You can make it as detailed or as simple as you like. So it really depends kind of how long you want to spend and what kind of effect you want to achieve. So once you've gone through and done all your cleaning up and creating your own subdivisions, the last thing you need to do is kind of close up these polygon holes. So again, right click in the free space. In there you've got close polygon hole, and you should just be able to hover over these gaps and you should see a white highlight appear, and then you can just left click and it will close up the gap for you. So I'm going to jump into a mesh that I cut up a little while ago. So hopefully you should have something similar to this. As I said, it could be a lot more simpler or it could be a lot more detailed. It's really up to you. So there's a few more things that we need to do before we can put this loft into our fracture object. The first thing I want to do is just make sure that all the normals are facing in the right direction. So I'm going to go to polygon mode and then again select all, and I can see that these aren't the right way round at the minute because the top is displaying as blue. So this is showing me that this is kind of the back face of the polygon. So I'm just going to reverse that, and again just right click anywhere in the free space. You've got reverse normals there. Another thing that I need to do is disconnect these polygons from each other. At the minute they're kind of stuck together. So if I pull this polygon up, you can see that it's dragging others around it with it, which isn't what we want. We want these polygons to act independently of each other. So again, just going to select all and then right click, and in there you should see disconnect. Now I'm not just going to click on disconnect because that won't do anything. I've got to go to the settings, so I'm going to click on the cogwheel and you should see a window appear. The only checkbox you see in here is the preserve groups. Now the preserve groups is turned on by default, which means it's kind of preserving our polygon group here. So it's seeing it kind of as one object still. So if I just clicked OK now, absolutely nothing would happen. So I need to untick preserve groups and then click OK. So now if I move this polygon up, you can see that it completely separates away from the rest of the mesh, and it should be exactly the same no matter what polygon I select and pull up, like so. So that's good. The next thing we need to do is add in a little bit of thickness. So again, just select all, and I'm going to use extrude for this. So select extrude. I'm going to change the offset to around 10, and I'm going to turn create caps on just so we get a solid object and not a hollow one, and then just click apply. So you should see we now have the makings of our chunks really. The shading's a bit funny. This is down to the Phong tag. We don't need it in this project, so I'm just going to select it in the object manager and delete it. Right, we're getting close now. The last thing I think we need to do is to convert these chunks into their own objects. You can see here in the object manager that we've only got one object, and we want one object representing each chunk. So to do that, I'm going to go to mesh and then conversion, and in there you have got polygon groups to objects. I'm just going to click that. Now this will take a couple of minutes, and it really does depend on how intricate your mesh is as well, so get ready for a little bit of a wait. I'm not going to sit here in silence, so I'm just going to fast forward through this bit. Okay, so that probably took about a minute, and you can see over on the right hand side now in the object manager, if I open up that hierarchy, I now have in the region of 330 chunks, no, 329 chunks, which is good. So what I need to do now is pop all of these into a fracture object. So I'll just minimize that, then go to MoGraph and then fracture. I'm going to put the loft into the fracture, and you can see now that I have a parent object, and then in there I've got all of the kind of little chunks. I don't need this parent object, so I'm just going to right click and delete without children. So now we need to add in the first of our effectors, which is going to be the plane effector. So I'm going to minimize the fracture, make sure it's selected, and then I'm going to go to MoGraph, effector, and then in there you've got your plane. You should see the mesh jump up. This is by default. If we have a look in the parameter tab of the plane, you can see that position is turned on and is set to 100 centimeters, which is why it's jumping up. We don't need position to be on, so I'm just going to turn it off. What we do need is for the scale to be turned on, so I'm just going to tick that. And I'm going to increase the scale Y to 10. You should see the entire mesh thicken up. As it stands at the minute, this plane effector is affecting the entire mesh. We don't want that. We want the plane effector to only affect a little bit of the mesh at a time. So we can do that using the plane's fall off. So if we jump into the fall off tab, you can see by default the shape is set to infinite, which is why it's affecting everything on this mesh. I want to change that to sphere, and you should see kind of this yellow spherical cage appear on your mesh, and you can see that the plane effector is only affecting anything that is within this yellow sphere, which is good. I can move this around now and we can animate it and do some really cool stuff with it. A couple of things that we do need to change. You can see that it is just scaling up at the minute, whereas in our animation you can see that it's scaling down on the X and the Z axis. So to do that, I'm going to jump back into the parameter tab. We need to look at the transform mode. By default it's set to relative. If I change that to absolute, it's going to start scaling in the chunks on the X and the Z axis for us, so we can start to see them disappearing on our mesh. So this is good. What I need to do now is animate this plane. You can do it just by moving it around on the axis and creating keyframes like that, but I'm going to use a spline path to animate along. So to do that, I am first of all going to go to create a spline. So spline menu, and then I'm going to use a helix. The helix at the minute is kind of going in the wrong direction, so I'm going to change the plane in the attribute manager. So I'm going to change plane to XZ, so it's kind of sitting on the floor. I'm quite happy with the start radius being 200. That's fine. I need the end radius to be 0, so it's kind of spiraling in. And then I'm going to reduce the height to 0 as well, so it's flat on the floor. Now if I jump into the top view, you can see that we have a nice spiral going into the centre of the mesh. Now we need to tell the plane effector to attach itself onto this spline. We do that using a tag, so I'm going to go to the plane effector and just select it, then go to tags, Cinema 4D tags. In there you've got align to spline. When you add your align to spline tag in the attributes manager, you'll see an empty window asking you for a spline path. So in our case it's going to be the helix, so I'm going to drag that into that window. What you should see is your effector jump to the start of your spline, which is good. So how do we animate this? Well, again, in the tag you have got a parameter called position. At the minute it's set to 0%, but I can increase that through to 100 and it will move to the end of the spline. And I'll just move it back again. So we can animate it from here. So the animation I think needs to take place between frame 0 and 125 if I remember rightly. So I'm going to make sure the time slider is at 0, make sure the position is set to 0%, and then control and left click to record a keyframe. And then move forward to 125, increase that to 100%, control and left click again. So if I press play now, you can see it's moving through, which is good. So the next thing I need to do is actually animate the scale of this plane effector itself. If I refer back to the animation, you can see that the effect is actually quite small to begin with, and as it moves along the spline it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until all of the mesh apart from the M has disappeared. So if I jump back into the plane attributes manager, and this is done in the fall off tab again because we are scaling up the fall off of the plane. You can see in here you've got size X, Y and Z. By default it's set to 100 centimeters. So I'm going to start this off at 0 on each axis. Again, make sure the time slider is at 0, control and left click. And then I'm going to move forward maybe to around 110, something like that. And then I'm going to increase it so it's a lot larger than the actual mesh itself. So maybe 305 I think is what I've put in before. Yep, that looks about right. And then control and left click again. So if I jump into the perspective view and play through, okay, that's looking good. The next thing we need to have a look at is keeping the chunks that belong to the M in the view at all times. This is where we come to the MoGraph selection tool and the MoGraph selection tag. Right, so to do that I'm going to go back to the top view, probably it'll be easiest. And I'm going to make sure that the plane is selected. Sorry, not the plane, sorry, the fracture is selected. And then go to MoGraph, and in there, second one down, you should see MoGraph selection. Okay, so with your fracture selected and MoGraph selection on, hopefully you'll be faced with these red dots. These red dots represent each chunk of this fracture. So each chunk will have a red dot assigned to it somewhere. What we need to do is select the dots that make up the M. You do that just how you would using your live selection tool, so you can click and drag over them and you should see them turning yellow as you go. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to see what points belong to what. You can see here that 2 points are quite close together. I just need to make sure that I've got that right. It's not the end of the world if you miss any out or do one too many, because you can always come into the tag and update it afterwards anyway. So I think that's about right, I hope. So you can see once you've made this selection, a tag will appear on the fracture object. First of all, I'm going to name it because I'm going to have more than one tag on this fracture object. So this one, I only want to affect the background, so I'm going to call this one background. Now, I was just being lazy. I didn't want to select all of these around the edge. I just wanted to do the M. So what I can do is cheat a little bit, go into the tag tab and then invert the selection. So now I've actually selected everything apart from the M. Just a bit of a time saver for me, really. So that's fine. So how can we apply this tag onto our plane object? Well, we can do that by going to the plane effector and selecting it, and then going to the effector tab. Underneath the strength, you have got a selection, and it's just an empty link window. So in there we can just drag in our MoGraph selection tag. So fingers crossed I've got all of these chunks selected. If I press play, yep, that looks about right. So it's only affecting the chunks that make up the background. Great, that looks good. So what happens now? Let me refresh my memory. Now we've got the shader effector that we need to work with. So again, I'm going to select the fracture object and then go to MoGraph effector, and the shader effector is what I want. So we need to work again with this MoGraph selection tag because we only want the shader to affect the chunks that belong to the M. So again, I'm going to go back to my fracture, and you can see that the selection points come up straight away. I'm going to go back into the top view. Again, this is me being lazy. I'm going to copy this tag. So I'm going to hold down Control, click and hold down, and drag over to the right. And now I've created a new tag. So I'm going to invert that first of all. In the Basic tab, I'm going to change its name to M. And then in the shader, exactly the same as in the plane, if we go to the Effector tab, you've got an empty selection window, and I can drag that tag into that selection window. Excuse me. Right. So now we've done that, we can have a quick look at the shader. Let's jump into the perspective view again so I can see a little bit more what I'm doing. So in the shader effector, if we jump to the parameter tab first of all, it's actually doing half the job for us. We want scale turned on. However, unfortunately, the scale is scaling them the wrong way. I want that minus 0.5. So we can just type in minus, and you can see that it's changed that for us. Just deselect that tag so we don't have those dots annoying me. Okay, so it's now reduced the size of our chunks for us, which is good. Now you can see in the animation, if I just scrub through, there's actually a slight variation, kind of an animated variation of the size of these chunks. That is down to the noise that I've put into the shading tab. So if I jump into the shading tab, and I'm going to add in a noise. So this noise we can adjust so we get the animation that we would like. I think I reduced the global scale maybe down to 50%, just so we get a little bit more movement. And then what I needed to do is increase the animation speed, just so that these chunks actually move, in scale. So if I press play, you can see we're getting a little bit of movement there, which is what I want. Okay, good. To go back up a level, I'm just going to click on this black arrow so we can go back to the effectors attributes. These chunks are a slightly different colour from the outside chunks, so I'm just going to turn off in the parameter tab the colour mode. I'm going to turn that to off just so it all looks the same. So this shader is animated. Obviously it's not like this all the way through, so we need to animate the shader's strength. So I'm going to go to the effector, and in there you have got a strength parameter. By default it's set to 100%, but I can set that to 0 so it's not affecting it at all. So at frame I think 122 or something like that. Yeah, very random number to remember, but it looks about right. I'm going to control and left click to record the strength at 0, and then very quickly, probably only 4 or 5 frames ahead, I'm going to increase that strength to 100%. So you can see the effect will happen very quickly. In our animation, you can see that these chunks are kind of growing gradually as it moves across the M. Again, this is done with a fall off, like the plane we had a spherical fall off. For our shader, we've got a fall off tab again that I'm going to go into. I'm going to change it to a box fall off, I think. Okay. I'm just going to hide the plane effector just so it's not so confusing for me to look at. Okay, so this fall off isn't quite big enough. You can see that these chunks are kind of their original size. This red box here is where the effect happens 100%. Between the red and the yellow is the fall off. So it's when the effect gets less and less strong, I suppose. So I need to increase the entire thing. I can do that using the size. Okay, so 200 seems about right. And I can animate this fall off just by using the coordinates. So I'm fine with it here now because it's affecting all of the chunks. I know that I want to animate it along the x-axis, so let me think, maybe 145. I think I'm going to control and left click to record a keyframe. Then I'm going to move the x-axis along until the M is kind of a solid M again. Whoops, I forgot to move this time slider forward. Silly of me. So I'll move that forward to 205. Move that along so that the M is a solid M again, so around 330-ish. And control and left click. So that's recorded this fall off now for us. So hopefully, if I press play, we kind of have the animation that's in the original. Good. That looks close enough. So I hope you have fun playing around with these techniques, and I shall see you in the next tutorial.